In the middle of a brutal winter storm, a badly injured K-9 stood frozen on a snowbank as if guarding the last secret he had left. He didn't seek shelter or try to run. He just stared at one spot, buried beneath the ice. And when a former Navy SEAL stepped forward
Okay, boy, I'll help you dig, I'll help.
Hands, what he touched made his whole body tremble, not from the cold, but from the truth finally clawing its way out of the dark. The storm crawled across the mountains like a living thing, swallowing fences, trees, and the last lines of sunset. Jack Mercer watched it from his porch, shoulders heavy under an old flannel jacket. He preferred nights quiet enough to hear his own breathing, but this one carried something sharp, a warning hidden inside the wind. A faint shape flickered through the white curtain. At first, Jack thought it was just drifting snow, the kind that tricks the eyes when the cold grows mean. But it moved again, steadier this time, pushing against the gale. A dog, big, lean, moving like every step hurt more than the last. The K-9 staggered into the open clearing, its vest barely hanging on, shredded down the spine. Snow clung to its coat, turning patches of black and tan into ghostly gray. It didn't search for shelter. It didn't even seem lost. It stood fixed on a mound of snow 20 yards from Jack's porch. Jack narrowed his eyes, instincts tightening. Working dogs didn't freeze like that unless something had gone terribly wrong. The wind howled, drowning out everything, yet the animal didn't flinch. It held a rigid, desperate stillness, as if guarding something beneath the ice. Lightning flashed behind the ridge. For a second, Jack saw the dog's ribs rise and fall in ragged shivers, but the animal refused to turn away from the snowbank. It let out a low, broken rumble. Not a threat, not fear, but a plea. Jack felt it more than he heard it. Jack stepped off the porch, boots crunching under a fresh layer of powder. The cold slapped him hard, the kind of cold that bit bone. The K-9 lifted its head. One ear stood upright, the other torn halfway down. Its eyes, amber, sharp even through exhaustion, locked onto Jack with a strange insistence. The dog tried to take a step toward him, but collapsed to its knees. It didn't fall towards safety or warmth. It fell facing the same snow mound, claws scraping weakly across the ice. Jack quickened his pace, cursing under his breath, the storm stealing half the sound from his lips. When he reached the dog, it tried to rise again, body shaking, determined beyond reason. Jack knelt beside it, feeling the tremor running through its frame. The vest across its chest bore the faded imprint of a unit he recognized. Search and Rescue, Wyoming. Not the kind of dog that wandered by accident. "Easy, buddy," Jack murmured, sliding an arm beneath the dog's shoulders. The animal resisted for a second, gaze snapping back toward the snowbank, a pained whine scraping out of its throat. Jack followed its stare, but saw only wind-shaped drifts and shadow. The dog let out another weak rumble, then its legs buckled fully. Jack caught its weight before it hit the ground. Even battered, the dog was strong, built for long days and harder nights, but whatever it had been through had drained every reserve it had left. Behind Jack, the storm rumbled deeper, the sky sinking into a cold, nearly black. He shifted the dog in his arms, feeling heat leaking from its wounds through the torn vest. The animal pressed its muzzle weakly against his forearm, but its eyes never left that mound of snow. Jack carried the K-9 back toward the cabin, fighting the wind as it shoved at his back. Twice the dog tried to twist its head, staring over Jack's shoulder at the snowbank until the storm swallowed it from view. Something waited under that ice, something the dog refused to abandon. At the door, Jack kicked his boots free of frost and nudged it open with his shoulder. Warm air met them like a soft wave, but the K-9 didn't relax. Its breath came in short, urgent pulls, as if its mission wasn't finished. As Jack lowered it onto a thick blanket near the fire, the dog's paw lifted feebly, pointing back toward the storm. For a moment, Jack just stared at that small, trembling gesture. A dog at the end of its strength still trying to give direction. Something twisted in his chest, old instinct, old duty, stirring back to life. Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin walls, begging to be heard. Jack knelt beside the dog, resting a hand on its heaving ribs. "Whatever you're trying to tell me," he whispered, "I hear you." The K-9's eyes fluttered but didn't close. Its gaze held the snowbank in memory, refusing to surrender to the dark. And in that flickering firelight, Jack felt it. The storm wasn't the most dangerous thing waiting out there. Something far colder was buried under that snow. The fire cracked softly, casting warm flashes across the cabin walls, but the K-9 didn't seem to feel any of it. Hudson lay curled near the hearth, breath shallow, eyes half open yet fixed on something far away. Jack crouched beside him, rubbing warmth back into the dog's frozen paws, trying to settle the tremor that never fully stopped. The storm outside pounded the cabin like a relentless fist. Every blast of wind rattled the shutters, but Hudson didn't flinch. His ears twitched only when the wind shifted, as if he could still hear something buried beneath it. Jack could see it. This wasn't fear. It was purpose, refusing to die. Jack reached for a towel warmed by the fireplace and pressed it gently against the torn patch along Hudson's ribs. The dog's muscles tightened, but he didn't pull away. Working dogs learn to endure pain, but Hudson's body spoke of battles fought long after he should have quit. Jack recognized that stubbornness too well. He sat back on his heels, exhaling long and low. Nights like this always pulled him backward into memories he tried to bury. The rookie's voice still echoed in the dark corners of his mind, the crack of that final gunshot never fading. He'd left the Navy, but the guilt had followed him into every quiet room. Hudson shifted, lifting his head for a moment. His amber eyes met Jack's, steady and unblinking. There was no panic in them, no plea for comfort. What Jack saw instead was expectation, as if the dog somehow believed Jack was supposed to understand more than he did. It left a knot in Jack's chest he hadn't felt in years. Jack rose and limped to a small cabinet beside the kitchen counter. His body still carried the stiff ache of old injuries, the kind that grew worse in winter. He retrieved a worn first aid kit, setting it beside Hudson. The dog watched him calmly, but every time the wind groaned against the cabin, his gaze flicked toward the door. As Jack cleaned one of the deeper cuts, Hudson jerked in pain, letting out a breathy growl that dissolved into a weak whimper. Jack paused, hand steady on the wound. "You've been through hell, buddy?" he murmured, voice soft enough the fire almost swallowed it. Hudson's tail twitched once in acknowledgement. The cabin dimmed as the storm thickened, shadows dancing like restless memories across the wood. Jack worked in silence, trimming away ice-stiffened fur, checking for deeper injuries. When he peeled back the shredded vest, he noticed something unsettling. A dented GPS unit strapped beneath the fabric, smashed intentionally. Hudson tried to lift himself then, paws scraping weakly against the blanket. Jack placed a hand on the dog's shoulder, steady but gentle. "Easy," he said, but Hudson didn't listen. He pressed his muzzle toward the door again, pushing against Jack's arm with surprising determination for a dog half-conscious. Jack followed the gaze Hudson refused to abandon. He saw only the wooden door, the faint seams of cold air trying to claw through. But Hudson saw more. Jack could feel that certainty. The dog's breath came quicker, each inhale pushing against the weight of exhaustion, each exhale a stubborn refusal to rest. He moved his hand along Hudson's neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the rough fur. This wasn't just adrenaline or fear. It was urgency, sharp and purposeful, as if the dog still carried a message no one else could deliver. Something or someone was out there, and Hudson believed he was running out of time. Jack sighed and leaned back against the bed frame, rubbing the tension from his brow. He didn't want to be involved, not again, not after everything. But the dog wouldn't stop staring at that door, wouldn't stop trying to stand. Hudson was fighting with the last threads of strength he had left, and Jack knew why. Dogs didn't cling to missions unless a life depended on it. The fire dimmed slightly, flickering low as the wind wailed across the chimney. Jack tossed another log on, watching sparks scatter like tiny stars before fading. Hudson's head lowered, but his eyes stayed open, fixed on the door like a soldier keeping watch. Even half frozen, he refused to abandon his post. Jack felt something shift inside him, something he'd tried to bury beneath months of silence and cold mountain nights. Hudson wasn't giving up, not even close. And Jack, for reasons he didn't want to admit yet, couldn't look away from that fierce, fragile determination. The storm might drown the whole mountain before morning, but Hudson had come through it for a reason. Outside, the wind roared again. Inside, Hudson's breath steadied slightly, but his gaze never moved from the door. Jack watched him for a long moment, jaw tightening, heart beginning to pulse in an old, unwelcome rhythm. Whatever waited out there in the storm, Hudson wasn't done with it. And Jack realized, whether he liked it or not, he wouldn't be able to ignore it much longer. The storm eased by dawn, leaving the mountains wrapped in pale blue silence. Jack stepped outside with Hudson pressed against his leg, the dog barely steady enough to stand. Frost glittered across the clearing, but Hudson's focus went straight to the same mound of snow he had guarded the night before. Jack felt the cold cut deep as he walked toward it, his breath rising in white clouds. Hudson limped beside him, every step a small battle. Yet his eyes stayed bright, sharp, almost fevered with urgency. Something in the dog's stare told Jack this wasn't just instinct, it was memory pulling him forward. When they reached the mound, Hudson stopped abruptly. His body shivered, not from the cold, but from the strain of holding himself upright. He touched the snow with his nose, then backed up, looking at Jack as if handing the burden to him. The wind brushed lightly over them, carrying an eerie stillness. Jack knelt beside the mound, brushing away the soft layer of morning frost. Hudson whimpered behind him, pacing tight circles, unable to settle. Jack let his bare hands sink into the snow, the cold biting instantly. He dug anyway, not sure what he was searching for, only sure that Hudson needed him to find it. His fingers struck something soft first, a scrap of fabric, frozen stiff. He pulled it free, shaking off the ice. A child's glove. Small, blue, torn along the seam. Hudson's whine sharpened into a trembling cry, the sound of a dog recognizing a scent that mattered more than pain. Jack's throat tightened. He set the glove gently on the snow, noticing the dark, dried smear along one side. Blood. He looked back at Hudson. The dog wasn't just alert, he was grieving. Panic and hope warred in his eyes, as if he feared the truth but needed Jack to reveal it. Hudson moved forward again, planting his paw over the mound, clawing weakly at the ice as if urging Jack to keep going. Jack dug deeper, snow clinging to his arms, melting against his skin. The cold numbed him, but something at the bottom forced him to stop and inhale sharply. A note. Crumpled, frozen, wedged between packed ice and a cluster of broken branches. Jack pulled it out carefully, the brittle paper cracking in his fingertips. Hudson pressed against his shoulder, panting, whimpering, waiting. Jack unfolded the note with slow, deliberate care. 4 shaky words scrawled across the page. "Help us. Don't call the sheriff." Jack stared at the message, the ink smeared as if written in haste. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, louder than the wind. Hudson nudged the note with his nose, letting out a soft huff that sounded almost like frustration, almost like pleading. Jack lifted his gaze to the tree line. The storm had wiped away most footprints, but faint disturbances in the snow hinted at someone moving through the night. Hudson followed his line of sight, his ears lifting despite the pain, tail stiff, not in fear, but in fierce determination. Jack exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the discovery settle in his bones. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. Someone had been here, someone small, someone terrified, and Hudson had tried to protect them. The dog pawed the snow again, eyes locked on Jack with heartbreaking urgency. Jack placed a hand on Hudson's neck, feeling the rough fur beneath his palm. "All right," he murmured, voice low but steady. "Show me where." Hudson's body sagged with relief, as if those words alone carried strength. He turned toward the forest's edge, taking a shaky step forward. The dog's limp deepened, but his resolve only hardened. He looked back at Jack, eyes burning with purpose, as if saying he would crawl through the mountains if he had to. Jack rose, tightening his coat, the wind pulling at his sleeves. Whatever Hudson had survived, it wasn't finished yet. Together they stepped into the quiet trees, following the trail only Hudson could truly see. The mountains waited ahead, cold, merciless, and hiding a truth the dog refused to abandon. And as Jack followed close behind, he felt the tremor in his hands return, not from the cold, but from the fear that whatever lay ahead had already tested Hudson beyond the brink. The forest swallowed them slowly, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Morning light slipped through heavy branches in thin, trembling threads. Hudson moved ahead in short bursts, each step a mixture of instinct and pain, his paws cutting weak tracks through untouched snow. Jack followed close, scanning the tree line the way old habits taught him to. His eyes shifted between shadows, searching for shapes that didn't belong. But Hudson didn't hesitate. The dog's nose stayed low, tracing a scent line that only he seemed able to hold on to, even in the frozen air. The deeper they went, the more the forest changed. Snow lay disrupted in odd patterns, not from animals, but from something dragged across it. Hudson slowed, sniffing a wide trail where the powder was, flattened into a dull sheen. Jack knelt, brushing his glove across it, feeling the faint groove beneath. A drag mark, long, uneven, heavy. Jack's jaw tightened. Hudson circled the area, tail rigid, ears angled forward with fierce concentration. The dog let out a short, frustrated bark as if the trail itself made him angry. Jack understood. Whatever happened here wasn't clean, wasn't kind. They moved on, and a few minutes later Jack spotted the first shell, casing half buried near a cluster of fallen branches. The brass glinted faintly under the thin light. He picked it up, turning it in his fingers. Hudson stared at it, nose hovering close, whining low as if recognizing the scent of gunpowder. A scrap of red cloth dangled from a broken twig nearby, fluttering weakly. Jack reached up and pulled it free, the moisture from melting snow seeping through his glove. It belonged to a child's jacket, same size as the glove he found earlier. Hudson's breathing hitched, his body tightening with urgency. The dog pushed forward suddenly, ignoring the stiffness in his injured leg. Jack had to jog to keep up. The forest tilted as they moved deeper, the wind weakening into faint groans that carried a strange emptiness. Hudson stopped again, this time beside a tree split near the trunk, bark torn away in uneven strips. Jack stepped closer and pressed his hand against the scarred wood. The marks weren't from an animal. They were from impact, a body thrown hard, maybe struggling. Hudson sniffed the base of the tree, then backed away, raising his head toward the far ridge. A soft growl trembled in his chest. A new track appeared beyond the tree, boot prints large and heavy. The stride was long, confident, almost careless. Jack knew that pattern. He felt something cold drop into his stomach, colder than the snow beneath him. Hudson sensed it too, stepping closer, touching Jack's leg with his shoulder. Jack exhaled slowly, forcing calm back into his hands. He crouched to study the prints. Fresh enough to see detail, old enough to blur at the edges. But the tread, wide block pattern, diagonal grooves, he had seen it before. Too many times, in too many places, he wished he could forget. Hudson pawed the snow anxiously, as if begging him to move, to follow, before the trail grew cold. Jack gave the dog a small nod. The forest tightened around them as they advanced, the silence turning heavier, more deliberate, like something unseen was watching from beyond the pines. Minutes stretched into long breaths. The scent trail twisted between narrow gaps in the brush, crossed a frozen creek, then climbed a small rise where the wind howled louder. Hudson reached the top first and stopped so abruptly Jack nearly walked into him. The dog stood frozen, staring ahead. Below the ridge sat a narrow valley, untouched except for a single, ugly streak carved through the snow, something dragged for yards until disappearing into thicker timber. Hudson let out a soft, trembling whine, his whole body pulled toward that direction like a compass needle recognizing true north. Jack laid a hand on Hudson's back. The dog's muscles quivered under his palm, not from fear, but from determination, raw and burning. "You're leading me somewhere," Jack murmured, almost to himself. Hudson leaned into his touch for a moment before stepping forward again, ready to continue. Together, they moved toward the valley floor, leaving behind the last remnants of safety and stepping into a trail carved by danger and by something Hudson refused to abandon, no matter the cost to himself. The forest grew darker as they descended into the narrow hollow. Snow clung to the branches overhead, muting even the faintest sound. Hudson slowed, his paws sinking deep, breath forming soft clouds. His ears twitched in every direction, as if he were listening for a voice only he remembered. Jack followed the dog's gaze toward the trees ahead. Hidden between pines and fallen logs sat an old hunting cabin, its roof sagging under years of storms. Smoke hadn't touched the chimney in ages, yet something about the place felt recently disturbed, like a door left open behind a fleeing shadow. Hudson limped forward, his steps quickening despite the pain. He stopped a few yards from the cabin, lowering his body, tail stiff and low. A soft growl rumbled through his chest, not a warning to Jack, but a warning to whatever might still be inside. Jack felt his instincts tighten in response. Snow had been brushed aside near the entrance, revealing scuffed dirt beneath. Jack crouched, touching the ground. The prints were faint but unmistakable. Small shoe marks, uneven, a child stumbling or pulled. Hudson lowered his head beside Jack's hand, sniffing hard before letting out a trembling whine. Jack pushed the creaking door open a crack. Cold air spilled out, sharper than the breeze behind him. Hudson slipped through first, his body tense, nose working fast. Jack followed close, scanning the dim interior. Dust coated the walls, but the floor told a different story. Tracks, drag marks, signs of struggle. Hudson padded toward a dark corner where a flimsy cot sat half collapsed. He stopped, muscles tightening, tail curling inward. Jack stepped closer and saw a small figure huddled beneath a frayed blanket, shaking with shallow breaths. A boy, pale, thin, barely conscious. Jack knelt slowly, lifting the blanket with careful hands. The boy's face surfaced, mud-streaked, cheeks hollow, lips cracked from the cold. His wrists were raw where rope had rubbed, the knots freshly cut. Hudson leaned close, pressing his nose gently to the boy's shoulder, as if reminding him he wasn't alone. The boy stirred, eyelids fluttering open. When he saw Hudson, a fragile relief washed through his expression. His voice came out as a whisper, frayed by exhaustion. "He tried to take me." But Hudson stopped him. The dog let out a soft huff, almost protective, settling beside the boy like a living barrier. Jack checked the boy's pulse, weak but present. His name came out in a broken murmur. Evan Riley, 11 years old. He clutched Hudson's fur with trembling fingers, holding on as if the dog were the only thing keeping him tethered to safety. Hudson pressed closer, matching his breathing with Evan's shaky rhythm. Jack moved around the cabin, searching for clues. A few canned goods lay scattered, dented from impact. A hunting knife lay buried halfway under the cot, and on the far wall a deep gouge streaked across the wood, fresh, violent, the mark of someone thrown or slammed hard during a fight. Hudson followed Jack's inspection with sharp eyes. When Jack paused at the gouge, the dog growled softly, low and steady, as if remembering the moment that made it. Jack turned to him, understanding dawning slowly. "You fought him," he whispered. Hudson blinked, not in pride, but in urgency. Evan shifted, lifting his gaze toward the window where thin daylight seeped in. "He said he'd be back," the boy rasped. "He said he remembers you." Jack froze, the world narrowing around him. Hudson's growl deepened, his body moving protectively between Jack and the door. A gust of wind slammed the side of the cabin, rattling the weak boards. Hudson stood tall despite his injuries, ears trained on the forest outside. His body was shaking, but his spirit was unbroken, every line of him ready to defend the boy again if needed. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle squarely on his shoulders. He knelt beside Evan, tightening the boy's blanket. "You're safe right now," he said, though his voice carried a tension he couldn't hide. Hudson moved closer to them both, pressing his side against the cot, eyes never leaving the door. Something out there still hunted. And Hudson wasn't done protecting the only survivor he'd found in the dark. The cabin fell quiet again, but it was a silence that didn't soothe. Hudson stood rigid near the door, nose lifted, breath trembling. His wound still leaked faint warmth through his fur, yet nothing could pull his attention from the world just beyond the thin wooden walls. Jack moved slowly, checking the weak lock on the door. It rattled under his palm, loose from years of neglect. Hudson's ears twitched at the sound. The dog shifted forward, planting himself directly in front of the door as if he already expected someone, or something, to push through it. Behind them, Evan drew in a shallow breath. The boy's voice came quiet and broken. "He always comes back when it gets this quiet." Jack turned to him, but Hudson reacted first, stepping closer to the cot, brushing his muzzle against Evan's arm as if promising he wouldn't let danger reach him again. A heavy crack echoed from somewhere outside, wood snapping under weight. Hudson froze, head snapping toward the window. His entire body tightened, every muscle remembering a fight he barely survived. Jack felt the old instincts surge back into his veins, the ones he had tried for so long to ignore. Snow fell from the cabin roof in a soft slide, but beneath that gentle sound came footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crushing the ice with a rhythm too controlled to be an animal. Hudson lowered his stance, a guttural growl rising from deep inside him, the kind that came from memory, not fear. Jack edged toward the window, easing aside the worn curtain just enough to peer out. A tall figure moved between the trees, shoulders broad beneath a heavy coat. Even through the snow haze, Jack recognized the posture, the arrogant, predatory stride he had seen 2 years before. Dale Harker. Hudson barked once, sharp and commanding, the sound filling the cabin like a warning flare. Evan shrank back, clutching the blanket. Jack stepped away from the window, his heartbeat steadying into an old, familiar rhythm. He knew this man. He knew the violence he carried like a second skin. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, closing in. Hudson planted his paws, ignoring the pain that made his leg tremble. Jack reached for a broken chair leg on the floor, improvised, but better than nothing. The room felt smaller, tighter, as the shadow outside reached the door. The handle jerked once, twice, Then a boot slammed against the wood, sending dust shaking from the ceiling beams. Hudson lunged forward, barking with raw fury, body crashing against the door in defiance. Jack grabbed the dog's harness, steadying him just as another kick splintered the frame. The door burst inward, snow swirling around the man who stepped through. His eyes scanned the room with a cold grin that didn't belong to someone surprised. Hudson leapt first, ignoring Jack's grip, slamming into the intruder with all the strength he had left. The cabin exploded into motion. Harker stumbled back but recovered quickly, grabbing Hudson by the torn vest and hurling him aside. The dog crashed against the cot, yelping as pain shot through him. Evan cried out, reaching a hand toward Hudson while Jack lunged at the man with a soldier's precision carved into muscle memory. The struggle was brutal, fast, the kind of fight that broke breath before it broke bone. Hudson dragged himself up again, limping toward the chaos, teeth bared, eyes burning with protectiveness. Jack blocked a punch, slammed his shoulder forward, but the man's strength was bear-like, fueled by rage. The world narrowed into blows, grunts, the smell of snow and sweat. Hudson hurled himself at Harker again, jaws clamping onto the man's sleeve, tearing cloth, fighting through agony. Jack seized the opening, driving Harker back into the table hard enough to crack wood. For a heartbeat, the room went still. Harker slid to the floor, dazed. Hudson staggered, sides heaving, but he stood over Jack and Evan like a shield. Jack grabbed Evan's hand, pulling him close. Hudson pressed against them both, trembling but unyielding. Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping fresh snow across the doorway. Inside the dim cabin, Jack tightened his grip on the boy, feeling Hudson lean heavily against his leg. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Hudson had given them the one thing they desperately needed: a chance to run. Snow began to fall harder as Jack pulled Evan to his feet. The boy leaned heavily against him, knees shaking from exhaustion. Hudson stood nearby, breathing in ragged bursts, but his eyes burned with a stubborn fire. Even wounded, he refused to let fear settle inside this room. Jack scanned the cabin quickly. The door hung crooked, the storm pushing snow into the narrow entryway. They couldn't stay, not with Harker unconscious only for moments. Hudson limped toward a broken wooden panel on the floor, nudging it with his muzzle, as if urging Jack to understand. Jack knelt beside the plank, realizing Hudson wasn't pointing to danger. He was offering a solution. The piece was long enough and smooth enough for a small body to lie on. Hudson gripped one end gently with his teeth, tugging it toward Evan with trembling effort, his legs nearly buckling beneath him. Evan blinked, understanding dawning through his exhaustion. Jack lowered him onto the makeshift sled, securing him with strips torn from the blanket. Hudson stepped forward again, placing himself at the front, shoulders squared despite the pain. He looked toward the door, then back at Jack, asking permission without a sound. Jack swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing deep into his chest. "You're sure?" he whispered. Hudson dipped his head once, determined. The dog stepped into the snow-swept doorway, body shivering from cold, but his stance steady. He leaned down, gripping the plank's rope knot between his teeth. Outside, the storm roared again, wind twisting into low, dangerous howls. Jack pushed open the fractured door the rest of the way. Hudson took the first step, paws sinking deep, pulling the sled inch by inch. Jack followed behind, one hand guiding Evan, the other ready to catch Hudson if he faltered. The forest greeted them with a burst of icy air that slapped their faces and stung their eyes. Hudson pressed forward anyway, muscles trembling but heart steady. Every few feet he stopped, adjusting his grip before pushing through another patch of snow. His breath came in short puffs that vanished instantly into the storm. The trees thinned as they moved toward the ridge, but the wind grew sharper, tugging at clothing and howling across the open land. Jack stepped ahead once, trying to take the lead, but Hudson pushed forward with a broken bark, insisting he be the one to guide them. Jack stepped back, trusting him. Evan's small voice rose behind them, weak but earnest. "He saved me. He's still saving us." Hudson's ears twitched at the sound, and for a moment his tail lifted just slightly, a quiet reassurance that he heard the boy he'd refused to abandon. Halfway across the valley, Hudson stumbled hard, collapsing onto his side. Jack rushed to him, dropping to his knees in the snow. Hudson's chest rose and fell in shaky waves, each breath a battle. He tried to lift himself, but his hind leg buckled twice before finding enough strength to hold his weight. Jack pressed a steadying hand against Hudson's neck. "Easy. Take a second." But Hudson pushed forward once more, leaning into the sled's rope, dragging it until the slope began to rise. The dog's paws cut deep furrows behind him, each step leaving a trembling imprint in the snow. As they neared the ridge, the storm's voice changed, no longer a violent scream, but a restless growl. Hudson's strides grew slower, shorter, but he kept going. He reached the edge of the clearing before his body finally gave out. His legs folded gently, not violently, as if he were choosing where to fall. Jack dropped beside him, one arm bracing Hudson's body. Evan crawled from the sled, dragging himself close until his small hands rested against Hudson's fur. The dog's breath warmed the cold air in tiny, fading clouds. He looked up at them both with tired eyes, still alert, still aware. Jack felt his throat tighten as he stroked Hudson's cheek. "You got us here," he said softly, the words nearly lost to the wind. "You did it?" Hudson blinked slowly, a weary acceptance in his gaze. Snow gathered along his muzzle, melting into the fur where warmth still lingered. In the distance, past the edge of the ridge, a faint echo drifted through the storm. Something metallic, something distant, something hopeful. Hudson lifted his head slightly, ears twitching toward the sound, as if recognizing it long before Jack or Evan could. And as the storm thinned around them, Hudson's body relaxed, not in defeat, but in quiet certainty. He had brought them as far as he could, and now he waited for whatever help he believed was still coming through the cold. For a moment, the ridge held them in a fragile stillness. The storm's roar faded to a low murmur, like a tired voice finally running out of anger. Jack knelt in the snow with Evan at his side, one hand on the boy's shoulder, the other wrapped around Hudson's neck, feeling the dog's labored breaths. Hudson lay on his chest, legs tucked awkwardly beneath him, sides rising and falling in unsteady waves. Snow clung to his fur, melting where his body still held warmth. His eyes remained open, not wild, not afraid, just tired. Deep, bone-deep tired, the kind that came after a mission finally reached its end. Evan's fingers gripped Hudson's collar, knuckles pale against thick fur. "Don't let him die," the boy whispered, voice cracking. Hudson's ear twitched weakly at the sound, as if answering a call he couldn't ignore. His paws scraped the snow once, then again toward a small drift beside him. Jack followed the motion, frowning. Hudson's claws scratched at the same patch of snow with stubborn intent, but his strength was fading. The dog tried to shift his weight, nudging his muzzle toward the drift, a soft whine escaping him. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a direction. Jack moved closer, easing Hudson gently onto his side. "Easy, partner," he murmured, his own breath visible in shaken bursts. He pressed his bare hands into the snow where Hudson had scratched. The cold bit into his skin like teeth, but he dug anyway, throwing chunks aside in frantic, uneven strokes. At first he found nothing but frozen powder and ice crust. Then his fingers struck something solid, half buried. Metal. Jack's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He dug faster, hands burning from the cold, until he uncovered a small device the size of his palm, dented, but not dead. An emergency beacon. Hudson let out a shuddered exhale, eyes closing for a moment, as if in relief. Jack stared at the beacon, his hands shaking so hard he could barely wipe the snow from its battered casing. He recognized the model. Search and rescue teams used these for last resort. Hudson must have torn it off before it was smashed completely. Somehow, the dog had dragged this broken lifeline through the storm, buried it deep enough to hide it from Harker, then clawed it back into Jack's reach at the very edge of his own strength. Jack swallowed hard, throat tight, and pressed the activation switch with numb fingers. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a small red light flickered, stubbornly, then steadied into a slow, pulsing glow. A faint hum rose under Jack's thumb, the signal fighting its way through the storm-thick air. Jack laughed once, a rough, disbelieving sound, and felt his eyes sting with sudden heat. Evan looked from the beacon to Hudson, tears spilling down his face. "He knew," the boy said softly. "He knew somebody would hear it." Jack nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He rested the beacon on the snow beside Hudson and laid his hand on the dog's head, fingers tangling into the damp fur. Minutes stretched, heavy and fragile. The three of them huddled together on the ridge, the storm swirling around them like a fading memory. Hudson's breathing stayed shallow but steady, his body pressed against Evan's knees. The dog's tail moved once, just barely, a faint tap of reassurance. Then, through the wind, another sound came, low at first, then clearer. The distant thrum of an engine. Jack lifted his head, scanning the gray horizon. A snowcat's lights cut through the white, slow but certain, followed by another vehicle close behind. Hudson's ears twitched. He recognized the rhythm of rescue. The first snowcat climbed the ridge with careful, practiced ease. A woman in a ranger jacket stepped out, goggles pushed back, cheeks reddened by the cold. Maya Hansen. Jack had met her once in town, long before he thought he'd ever need her help. Her eyes swept the scene in a heartbeat and understood more than words could. Carry. Medics crowded in fast, lifting Evan onto a proper sled, wrapping him in insulated blankets. Another knelt beside Hudson, hands moving gentle and skilled, checking pulse, breath, pupils. "He's in bad shape," the medic murmured, "but he's still fighting." Hudson blinked up at them, stubborn spirit unbroken. Maya stepped up to Jack. "We got a partial signal from a damaged beacon," she said. "Didn't think anyone could even get one to work in this storm." Jack glanced down at Hudson, then back at her. "I didn't," he answered quietly. "He did?" Maya followed his gaze and nodded, a rare softness in her eyes. They loaded Hudson onto a stretcher beside Evan, tucking the boy's hand under the dog's collar so they stayed connected. As the snowcat turned toward the valley, Jack sat across from them, one hand resting on Hudson's flank. The dog's chest rose and fell under his palm, fragile but stubborn, just like the first night he appeared. Later, when the storm finally broke and the sky cleared to a pale winter blue, news would spread about the kidnapped boy, the captured hunter, and the K-9 who refused to quit. They would hang medals, take pictures, and call Hudson a hero. Evan would stand a little taller every time he said the dog's name. But on that ridge, in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the boy whose small hand never left Hudson's fur, the man who finally laid down the weight of an old failure, and the dog who believed, against all logic, that someone would come if he could just stay standing long enough. As the snowcat rolled toward safety, Jack leaned back, eyes closing for a brief, exhausted second. Hudson shifted slightly, pressing his head against Jack's knee. The gesture was faint, but it carried a message Jack understood better than any word. The mission was over. They had made it out of the storm, and for the first time in a very long time, Jack Mercer felt like he was finally walking toward the light instead of away from it. If this story touched you, drop a simple comment below. Even a 0 or 1 is enough for us to know you're here. Your words help keep these stories alive. And if you'd like more heartfelt journeys like this one, make sure to subscribe. There are many more stories waiting for you in the next videos.